Hello and welcome to StudyIQ. I am your friend Rahul Saigaonker, and today we are going to have a discussion about the Economic Survey 2021-2022. Now, we all know that the Indian Parliament's budget session has begun today itself. Today in the morning, the session began with President's address. President of India, Ramnath Kovind, he addressed the joint session of the Parliament where he gave the details and the direction in which the Indian economy is headed. After the presidential address, India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman gave us insights about the economic survey for this year. Later on, by 3:30, economic survey was made available to the public. So today, we are going to focus on today's report. What are the insights? What is the relevant information? What is the data from economic survey? What would be our approach in this particular video? See, we are going to focus more and more from exam perspective. We are going to take out relevant data, relevant information, which is very important for us from exam perspective. In the beginning of the discussion, in fact, I'm going to give you some details about economic survey, which are very important from MCQ perspective. I'll give you all the details about the economic survey, who prepares it, all the other information. Then we'll jump into this particular report. Now, in this report, first we'll take a macro picture, a macro overview of Indian economy and why the predictions of economic survey have been positive. The economic survey says that India's GDP growth outlook is quite positive. More than 8% growth is anticipated. We'll talk about why such growth is anticipated, and then we'll move on and talk about different sectors of Indian economy. We'll take out some important information from this, which is very important for UPSC Civil Services as well as State PSC. So that would be the approach here. And if you are preparing for UPSC Civil Services State PSC examination, do visit StudyIQ.com, or you can also download our app from Google Play Store where you'll get all the information about us. Right. With that note, let's begin the discussion. Let's first talk about what exactly is the meaning of economic survey. You must have heard about economic survey, which is released every year. All right. It is a flagship annual document which gives you the report card basically. I would say economic survey is a report card of the economy of the fiscal year. We all know that the fiscal year is going to end March 31st. It's February starting, March 31st, the financial year will get over. So we are going to get what happened in the previous year. What was the country's economic development? What was the performance of each and every sector? And what can we expect from future? So it's like a report card of 1 year and the prediction for the next year. Now, normally, the economic survey used to come in 2 volumes, especially from the past few years. Now, this practice was started by the Chief Economic Advisor, Arvind Subramaniam, and after him, many other Chief Economic Advisors have been continuing that practice. But this year, the economic survey has been given in a single volume. This economic survey is quite gigantic, around 440 pages of details and important information is available in economic survey. Right? So this year, a different thing is a single large report. Apart from that, there is statistical index and statistical data also. But earlier, volume 1, volume 2 used to come, but now it's only volume 1. And let me tell the aspirants that this economic survey is available for you to download pretty easily. You can download it online, and if you can read digitally on your tab, on your laptop, you can download it. You can even order it. If you want the hard copy, you can order it through the government website, or it will be available later on the other platforms also. Right? The next question. Who prepares the economic survey? Economic survey is prepared by the Chief Economic Advisor. Now, this year, the Chief Economic Advisor, I want to say the former Chief Economic Advisor, Krishnamurthy Subramaniam, his term ended in December 2021. So this economic survey was mainly prepared by the Principal Economic Advisor and the other officials. And if I'm not wrong, Principal Economic Advisor is Sanjeev Sanyal. We have heard his name multiple times, right? In fact, just a couple of days back, the government has appointed V. Ananta Nageswaran as the Chief Economic Advisor, and around 3:30, he was the one who had a media interaction and released this economic survey. Alright, let's get some other information about economic survey. A question might come in your mind that why economic survey is presented just 1 day before budget. If you have been following budget, you know that budget date has been shifted. Earlier, the budget used to happen on the month end, basically February end, but now it happens on the first day of February, first working day of February. So tomorrow we do have budget, but 1 day before that, the economic survey is released. The question is, why do we release economic survey 1 day before? Now, as I told you, economic survey is an annual document, which is like a report card of your economic performance for that fiscal and what can we expect next. In fact, 1 day before from the survey, what we can understand is what is going to come up or what would be the picture in budget, because whatever performance we have given this year, based on that we are going to create our budget and next year's policies. In fact, right from the beginning, from independence, the economic survey was presented along with the budget every year till 1964, but the two were delinked. Since 1964, the economic survey is released first, just a day before that, and the next day budget is released, and this practice is being followed even now. Now, the next question. Sir, what happens if the government does not present economic survey, if it does not want to present its report card? The economic performance is very bad and it doesn't want to show it. There is no hard and fast rule that the economic survey has to be presented. Please remember, it is the prerogative of the government. Apart from that, it is prepared by the chief economic advisor. So they look at the economy, they look at the performance of different sectors of the economy, and then they give some prescriptions. And those prescriptions or recommendations, they are not binding on the government of India. Please remember this. And we release it one day before because it makes sense. Why? Because it provides the context to the budget. Now we can anticipate what we are going to see in the budget tomorrow. At least a few pointers can be understood that the focus area or the focus sector of our economy would be this in the budget. Right? So you'll understand through our interaction. In the meantime, I would say that whenever we are discussing this, you learn to anticipate that probably if some particular sector is doing bad, then there would be focus on that sector. Or if some sector is stagnant, then there would be more allocation to that sector in the budget. That can be anticipated from the survey itself. The next question. So why is economic survey very, very much important? And why so much of hue and cry about that? I watch that in the news continuously. Just a day before budget, if you talk about any news channel, they would be continuously covering this economic survey. Why so much of hoopla around this? It's quite obvious, the numbers. And on a lighter note, for all the aspirants, it's important to read and get some data for your examination, right? But in general, economic survey numbers are the most watched numbers just before the budget, because we get an idea about how the budget is going to be. In fact, economic surveys, most important thing is the GDP projection or GDP forecast for the upcoming year. Now, this GDP forecast is again based on crucial insights of the country's economic condition. If some of the sectors are doing well, if some of the sectors are not doing well, then we focus on the sectors which are not doing well. The other sectors, they just need a small push and we can enhance our GDP. So that's the basic idea of economic survey. And that is why we watch it. That is why we read it. That's why we are having this particular discussion today, right? The next information, final factual information. Do economic surveys have themes? Yes, generally economic surveys have themes. The last year's theme was saving lives and livelihoods. In fact, this year there has been no particular theme, but one of the important ideas has been use of new forms of data and information for tracking economic development and economic activity in India. Now, apart from that, one more very important information that we get from this economic survey is the current levels of economic development. They have reached the pre-pandemic level. That means just before 2020, whatever the economic numbers were there, we have actually reached. Why? See, if this was the growth curve of India, we see this is 2020, March 2020, suddenly we saw a negative growth, and 2020, 2021, slowly progress is being seen. In the second wave, it went again down, and now we are somewhere along the same line. That means the economic development has reached the pre-pandemic level. That's also a very, very important observation from this year's economic survey, right? Now, with this background of economic survey, let's jump in the economic survey and talk about the state of the economy. As I told you, the first thing that we are going to observe is a macro analysis of India's economy and why they have predicted that India's GDP growth is going to be positive. As I told you, today by 3:30, this particular report was released, and if you want it, it's available for download online, and if you want, I can share it on my Telegram channel also @Rahul Sai 222, or you can also order the hard copy of this particular book, right? Right, let's talk about the prediction. I told you that economic surveys, most important forecast would be the GDP numbers, because they're very relevant for us. They're very relevant for the market. They're very relevant for everybody. So the Indian economy, according to this year's economic survey, is in good position to witness GDP growth rate of about 8 to 8.5% in 2022-23. The fiscal year will start from 1st April, we know. So from 1st April 2022 to 31st March 2023, our GDP growth rate is approximately forecasted to be 8 to 8.5%. Now again, this projection is based on all the assumptions that they have taken. Some of the assumptions are, the first thing is this year, in 2022-23, the assumption by the chief economic advisor and the team is that the pandemic is almost over. The pandemic is not going to have any debilitating effect, or it is not going to create any economic disruption. That is the assumption. And if the pandemic strikes, if there is a new variant, or if there are some new multiple variants, then this number is going to come down. Apart from that, another assumption has been that the monsoon will be normal. Now, this is based on the Indian Meteorological Development's prediction that the monsoon is going to be normal. Apart from that, there would be orderly withdrawal of global liquidity by major banks. That's an assumption that has been made. Since last few weeks, I think we have been observing in news from United States of America that the US Federal Bank is going to increase its rates, right? The benchmark rates are going to be increased. But economic survey here observes that such global liquidity withdrawal, because we know because of pandemic, most of the countries, they had pumped in liquidity in their own economies. India was no exception. We reduced the benchmark rates, we reduced the repo rate, we reduced the reverse repo rate. Liquidity in India is very high. And since the liquidity is very high, you have seen that the interest rates of your loans are quite low. We want economic activity. We don't want slowdown. That is why we have kept loan rates very cheap so that people take loans and start businesses, right? So liquidity is quite high, not just in India, all over the world. And now we are looking at a reversal. We recently discussed about the SBI Eco Wrap, where the SBI predicts that in the upcoming months, we might expect the reverse repo rate to go up too, right? Now, apart from this, another assumption by the economic advisors is the oil prices this year, 2022-23, this fiscal, they are going to range in 70 to 75 per barrel. Now, this is an assumption, but we do not know how the oil prices will run. They might go low or they might increase also, because looking at the volatility of this oil price, it is connected to the West Asian politics, and we are looking at a potential crisis in Ukraine. We are looking at a potential crisis in Yemen, a potential crisis in the entire West Asian region. So if the oil price remains in this particular range, then this would be the growth projection. Apart from that, we know that during COVID-19 pandemic, the global supply chains were disrupted. And the assumption by Chief Economic Advisor and his team is that the global supply chains are going to resume back. That means the business is going to increase, the economic recovery is going to be faster, and based on that, we have this particular projection. Now, a very interesting thing to observe here is the economic survey itself, it goes for a safer prediction of about 8 to 8.5% for this fiscal. But if we look at the other growth projections, now this is IMF report, January 2022 update, where if you look at India, all right, 2022, the projection is around 9%, and 2023 it is 7.1%. In fact, if you just observe India's name here, India is the fastest growing economy. No major economy, I would say, it is going in this particular range. It is growing at this particular range. If you look at the developed countries, their growth rate is also in positive, because 2020 was negative for everybody in the world. And now slowly things are recovering, but India's projection is quite high. But economic survey says we are going to grow by 8 to 8.5% in the fiscal 2022-23. Now the question is, let's assume that everything is fine. All the predictions given by the economic survey, the assumptions are fine, and then we grow by 8 to 8.5. But the question is, on what basis they are telling that? The growth rate is 8 to 8.5, but the growth rate in terms of real terms, it is higher, 9.2%, because last year it was huge contraction, negative 7.3%. This year the real growth would be around 9 to 9.2%. All right, but the question is, why such a prediction? Why we are in a positive right now? Now this is the theme of our discussion also. On what basis is our growth going to be 8 to 8.5 in positive? There are 4 factors which have been highlighted. The first one is widespread vaccine coverage, and a very interesting thing has been told by the economic survey, which we'll talk about. Apart from that, India's robust growth in exports is going to continue even now. Yes, India's imports are rigid, but India's exports are also rising. There is trade deficit, of course, but slowly and steadily our exports are also growing. Apart from that, India has brought many supply side reforms and they have eased many regulations, because of which we might expect a better business environment, enabling environment in India, so that these growth numbers can be achieved. Apart from that, the economic survey says that India has availability of fiscal space to ramp up its capital spending. That means in the coming time, we are going to have enough money to spend on capital expenditure. So if we do spend on capital expenditure, the economy is going to grow continuously. On all these terms, they say that our growth rate would be 8 to 8.5%. Now let's try to analyze, right? Slowly and steadily we'll talk about one after the other. We'll talk about these features and then we'll jump into the different sectors from the report. Now, it says wide vaccine coverage. In fact, the report itself says that vaccine coverage or vaccination in any country should now be treated as a macroeconomic indicator, which is a very important observation from this economic survey. The report says vaccination has not merely remained a health response, because based on the vaccination, you are keeping your economy open, you are not going for any lockdowns or restrictions, and then you are letting the economic activities go normally. And that is why the economic survey says it is now a macro indicator. It has to become a macro indicator, especially in the contact intensive services. Wherever there is a contact needed, wherever there are people needed continuously. In the digital arena, we have seen the COVID-19 has not impacted heavily. In particular, I'd say the companies, the information companies, the information and communications technology companies like the Infosys, HCL, etc., their stocks have continuously risen. But wherever there is contact needed, such services have gone down. And now, since we have gone for higher number of vaccination, we will see the economic activity growing continuously. The report says that India has delivered 157 crore doses that has covered around 91 crore people. Now, booster doses are also being given continuously, and now the vaccination for teens between the age of 15 to 18 has also begun. So, what we are expecting is more and more economic activity. That is why we are looking at a growth rate of 8 to 8.5%. Now, apart from this, they have also given some growth projection. The first thing that has been observed about our state of the economy is today our economic growth is back to the pre-pandemic level, and this can be proved from many things. The first thing is the GDP and the gross value added. If you look at these numbers, this is quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4, 2019 and 20. And this was a time of pandemic. This was the time of the second wave. The first pandemic, first wave, the second wave. But if you look at the numbers here in the 2022, you will see that we are going back slowly and steadily to the pre-pandemic level. Apart from this, if you look at the current account balance also, here also, as soon as we hit 2020, the current account balance or current account deficit, I would say, it was continuously increasing. But now, slowly and steadily, it is coming back to the pre-pandemic level. Same thing in exports also. Now here, I have given you an example of net services, right? Services export net. Now, if you look at the pandemic period, the services export was very high and the merchandise export was continuously going down. And that is why, if you look at these numbers, you will see we are again going back to normal, right? Now, apart from this, if you look at the growth projections, as I told you, our forecast for GDP growth is 8 to 8.5%. In real terms, it is about 9.2% because last year it did contract. If you look at sector-wise growth, overall economic activity is going to be fine. Agriculture sector is going to grow at a handsome rate. In fact, this has been quite stagnant from very long time. The agriculture sector this year is expected to grow by 3.9%, which was previously 3.6%. So a positive growth rate for agriculture sector is anticipated. The industrial sector is likely to grow at 11.8%. Now, it was the services sector which was heavily hit. Yes, we can talk about IT services which were not hit, but all the other contact intensive services were hit extremely hard during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the services sector, this is going to see a growth rate of 8.2% this financial year, where it contracted last year. It was negative 8.4% in the last fiscal. This fiscal, that means in the upcoming fiscal, we are going to look at 8.2% growth rate for the services sector. Now, again, if you look at growth projections specifically, Agriculture allied sector around 3.9%, industry 11.8%. You can see here the segregation of different sectors under industry, and then under the services we are looking at 8.2% growth rate. That too under the trade, hotel, transport, communication, it is quite high, 11.9%. All right. Now, apart from this, export import is going to be in positive. Now, India's total exports are going to grow by 16.5%. This is even surpassing the pre-pandemic levels. Now, this is quite surprising. The Economic Survey observes that India's exports have been quite robust despite a lot of problems due to COVID-19 and all other problems like, say, operation of shipping, fewer operation of shipping vessels, events like blockage of Suez Canal, the COVID-19 outbreak in port city of China. Despite many things happening around the world, which led to rise of trade costs in exports. Despite all these things, the exports are going to rise by 16.5%. In fact, India's import have also recovered very strongly. Now, this has happened because of domestic demand rising continuously, especially the import of crude and import of metals has increased. And in the upcoming year, the imports are expected to grow by 29.4%. surpassing the even pre-pandemic levels also. That is why the economic survey tells us that the economy is now going back to pre-pandemic levels. In fact, it is now growing from the pre-pandemic level also, growing higher than that. Right. Apart from this, if we look at the top 3 merchandise exports, which are our exports, petroleum products, pearls, and iron and steel. Please remember these because MCQ can be set up where they ask which merchandise export is the highest for India. Petroleum products. Please remember this fact. We import maximum amount of crude oil and we export maximum amount of petroleum products which are refined. That is why India has many refineries. Alright. Now, apart from that, where do we export most? Where do we export most? The highest we send materials to USA, and the second highest to UAE, and then China. Now, this is the share of top 10 export destinations for India in the period of April to November 2021-22. This fiscal itself. Apart from that, why our exports are doing well? The economic survey tells that Indian government has taken many steps because of which the exports are doing well. In fact, they are going to do well continuously. The growth rate of exports is going to be around 16.5 because the government has introduced schemes like remission of duties and taxes on exported products. The government has developed district export hubs. There have been production-linked incentive schemes. The Exim Bank, Export-Import Bank of India, has infused a lot of capital in the export-import sector. Also, there is Export Credit Guarantee Corporation of India insurance now available for exporters from India. Export Promotion Capital Goods Scheme is also running. Then there is PM Gati Shakti Plan. We'll talk about PM Gati Shakti Plan. Now, this mainly aims to develop India's logistics, not just the road, but the entire shebang. That means the road, rail, air infrastructure, the shipping industry, everything. PM Gati Shakti Plan, it aims to improve the connectivity throughout India. Now, because of all these things, our exports are doing very, very well. Now, apart from that, as I told you, imports are also bouncing back because the demand has increased. The lockdowns have gone, the restrictions have gone. Now we are demanding more and more gold, demanding more and more petroleum, crude oil, right? So, if you talk about top 5 imports for India, please remember it is again petroleum, that is crude. Now, this is unprocessed petroleum. The second highest import is gold, which is quite surprising. Then the third one is petroleum products itself. Now, you have seen here that we import highest amount of crude, we export highest amount of petroleum products. But for that processing also, we order many other petroleum products. So the number 3rd import is petroleum product itself. Then we have pearls, precious and semi-precious stones, then coal and coke on number 5. These are the top 5 imports that we bring. And from where do we get these imports? There are no prizes for guessing here. The first country, the top country is China, then UAE, then USA. From China, we have imports of many items. Then we have UAE, mainly crude imports, and then USA. Then we have Saudi, Iraq, again for crude oil. All right. So this is the top 10 import sources from April to November 2021-2022. So what is the observation here? The Indian economy is going to bounce back. The GDP numbers are going to be high because we have gone for huge vaccinations, right? We have gone for a better export and import policy, the numbers that we have seen. And then we have brought supply side reforms, because of which we expect 8 to 8.5% growth rate. That is what economic survey says. The distinguishing feature of India's economic response has been the emphasis on the supply side reforms rather than reliance on demand management, which used to happen, I'd say, 2 to 3 decades back for sure. And now they have brought many supply side reforms like simplification of processes. They have removed retrospective taxation measures. They're going for privatization, disinvestment, production linked schemes, and so on. Now let's try to understand what are the supply side reforms that have been brought. Let me take you directly to the document here so that we just go through some of the supply side reforms that have been mentioned in the economic survey. Right, this is the economic survey itself, where the economic survey mentions about the supply side reforms. You can see here what reforms. Let me zoom in a little, and wherever the cursor is moving, just focus there. What supply side reforms the government has brought. See here in the industry, what are the measures that they have brought. Production linked incentive scheme approved for 13 sectors, including automobile, auto components, pharmaceutical drugs. Retrospective tax repealed. Then if you talk about BPO sector, liberalized guidelines for the BPO sector. In the telecom structure, in the telecom sector, there have been many structural reforms. There are procedural reforms which have been brought, which are mentioned here. In the public procurement policy, new guidelines for procurement of project management in October 2021, they were announced. In the aviation sector, new drone rules were announced. In the financial sector, reforms in the deposit insurance. We have discussed this on StudyIQ, where now your deposit insurance has gone up from 1 lakh to 5 lakh, which is a very important reform. Apart from that, MSME sector redefinition has been done. The definition of MSME itself has been revised, and other schemes have been brought, which we'll talk about. And then there is space and geospatial sector, where liberalization has been brought in traditional satellite communication and remote sensing. Other reforms have also been mentioned here. Now in terms of disinvestment, you can see here the government has brought monetization plan. We know about that. New public sector enterprise policy and asset monetization strategy. The national monetization pipeline, which was announced, 6 lakh crore worth core assets would now be given to public sector, not to own but to use them, to improve them. Then there have been labor reforms, 4 labor codes. Then in defense sector, there is corporatization of Ordnance Factory Board, which was mentioned. And you can see almost all these reforms have been discussed by us on StudyIQ, which is again mentioned in the economic survey. So they have brought many supply side reforms, because of which the economic survey says we are looking at a growth rate of about 8 to 8.5%. Right, so what we have discussed, we have seen that the Indian GDP forecast is quite positive, mainly because of the vaccination. The second was because of the export growth. We have spoken about the export import. Then we have spoken about the supply side reforms. The final pointer that the economic survey says is because of the money, where it says that India's fiscal space is looking very positive. Now why? Now if we look at the government strategy, what was the strategy of the government during pandemic? The economic survey says they used 3 strategies: the barbell strategy, the safety nets, and the agile response. Now, the barbell strategy is a classic investment strategy. Barbell strategy means you've seen a barbell. This is a bar, and you will have 2 bells or 2 weights on the either side. Now, what you do is you do not focus on this particular region, but you focus on the 2 extremes. That is the meaning of barbell strategy. What the economic survey says, barbell strategy or the agile strategy that Indian government used is not to rely on this middle path, but investing more and more on extremes. For example, the safety nets. Now, the Indian government during the pandemic, it raised its debt, because it's quite obvious, because there has to be money which has to be pumped into the market. The liquidity was quite high. We reduced the repo rates. We increase our borrowings. That means we increase our debt, and then we gave money directly to people as safety net. That is what the government did, and it gives example of many schemes like the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, the Pradhan Mantri Kisan Samman Yojana, right? The Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Rozgar Abhiyan, emergency credit lines were given, Pradhan Mantri Swanidhi scheme, where money was directly put into the people's accounts, other monetary and financial support systems we have seen, right? Around 5 lakh crore spending towards these safety nets. Now, this was the strategy. Again, barbell strategy, where they went for spending money more and more, giving to the vulnerable sections, so that India will have liquidity and there would be money available for spending, for business, for other activities, for consumption, so that we can get some positive outlook for economy. Right? Now, what the economic survey says, despite doing all this, we are in a very good fiscal space. It says that the government finances, it witnessed consolidation during 2021-22. Now, how the consolidation happens? That means the government revenue is on a decent path. The corporate tax revenue is decent. The income tax revenue is decent. The GST taxation or GST money is also pretty decent. In fact, the financial year 2022-23, that is the upcoming fiscal, it is going to be supported by widespread tax coverage. Apart from that, the disinvestment is also increasing. Rupees 1.81 lakh crore was raised through equity issues. This year also, we are looking at two big IPOs. Air India privatization, already decided Air India is going to Tata Sons. Then there is IPO of LIC, which is in pipeline, which is going to give huge money to the government. So in April to November, this financial year, rupees 89,000 crore was raised via 75 IPOs. Now, if we compare this with the previous year, only 29 company IPOs, it gave us 14,000 crore in the same period in 2020. So we can see that people are spending more and more in Indian markets. In fact, the economic survey says more than 2 crore demat accounts have been opened by Indians during this particular period. So money is there in Indian market. Fiscal space is looking very good. Now, if we look at the fiscal deficit, the economic survey does highlight fiscal deficit is going to remain high, but over a long period, we are going to reduce it. You can see here, the fiscal deficit is still in higher numbers, but the revenue trends are quite positive. Now, if we look at the revenue periods, April-November 2019, April-November 2020, April-November 2021, continuously rising revenues we are looking at in terms of corporation tax, the income tax, the custom tax, the GST also. You can see that the GST collection for 2021-22, they were quite buoyant. They were improving, again, reaching to pre-pandemic level. There is also rising year average of monthly gross GST collection. Every month, GST gross collection is rising continuously. Apart from that, this is a very important thing. The composition of gross tax revenue for 2021-22 budget estimates, the maximum that they anticipate is from the corporate tax, then tax on income. Now, corporate tax 25%, income tax 25%, indirect taxes, GST, it yielded around 29% of the income. That means the government will be in a very decent fiscal space, so that they are going to spend more and more on capital expenditure. That means this year also we are looking at more investment. Of course, the debt is going to go higher. If you look at the debt numbers, the total liabilities, if you look at 2014 to 2020, the number is going to increase. In fact, 2020, 2021, much higher, which is quite anticipated because of the pandemic. More and more borrowing, the debt is going to go high. But this money was pumped into the economy because money was directly put into people's accounts. Vulnerable section, women got money through different schemes, Pradhan Mantri, Garib Kalyan Yojana, Swanidhi Yojana, PM Kisan Yojana. So money was pumped into the economy. That's why this year also we might see the same thing. Now you can see here the debt to GDP ratio during the last 2 years, it is increasing. So over a period of time, we are looking at fiscal consolidation. This number is going to go low probably in the upcoming years. Now, apart from this, the economic survey has observed a very important trend. Inflation is going to be huge problem. Now, why? See, inflation is not just a problem in India. The economic survey observes that India's consumer price index inflation, it stood at 5.6% year on year in December 2021, which was quite high. If you look at these numbers, the CPI and the WPI inflation, they have been rising. And this is not just the problem with India. It's a global phenomenon. Why it's a global phenomenon? If you look at the advanced economies, their inflation is also rising. The emerging and developing economies, their inflation is also rising. Why? Because during the corona pandemic, every country, they pumped in money into their economy. Now, if you pump in the money, what is going to happen? At one point or the other time, we are looking at inflation. And since the economic recovery is happening, we are looking at higher inflation numbers. And that is what the economic survey has predicted. You can see here that the CPI was quite high, not just here, but in many other countries. And the economic survey, it warns India of something called as the imported inflation. That means inflation that is imported from the developed countries to India. A classic example being the United States Federal Bank looking to up its rates, and when that is done, we can see it creates problems in India also. So some sort of imported inflation may happen in India this year, as has been warned by the economic survey. So that was a discussion about the overview of Indian economy. Now let's move on and talk about some of the important chapters and important sectors that have been observed in the economic survey. Right? First, let's talk about the Sustainable Development Goal. The economic survey talks about the progress that India has made in terms of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. It mentions about the NITI Aayog's SDG index, which we have discussed, and it clearly shows that from 2018 we have been continuously improving, and now 16 plus goals have been qualitatively analyzed, and now the targets have also increased. If you remember, we had discussed about the NITI Aayog's SDG index report, where from 39 targets today we have reached to 70 targets, and the analysis of 70 targets, 115 indicators are gauged. And this also was discussed that in 2020 there are many states which are doing quite positive in terms of achieving sustainable development goals, especially the states from southern and western India and northern India. But this particular belt has to improve, and the northeastern India has to improve in terms of improving or achieving the sustainable development goals. Now, apart from this, the economic survey also talks about the need of climate finance. For sustainable development, we need climate finance, and the mention of Paris Climate Agreement was also made. Obviously, in the economic survey, it clearly mentions that the Paris rule book has not been finalized. So probably we are looking at the conference of parties in December this year, where the Paris rule book would be discussed. But climate finance is a very important pointer which has been highlighted in economic survey. It says that in January 2021, a task force on sustainable finance has been set up by the Department of Economic Affairs in Ministry of Finance. Why? To provide sustainable framework. It defines the framework for sustainable finance in India. Apart from that, India is also actively contributing towards the global efforts for green finance. It says that RBI has joined Central Banks and Supervisors Network for greening the financial system in April 2021. Now, apart from this, under the Sustainable Development Goal chapter, it is the same discussion that we have had many times. What are the initiatives that India has taken? India has been a champion in terms of climate change or fight against climate change. We have started the International Solar Alliance. We are a part and parcel of Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. So all these things have been mentioned in the report. But nonetheless, it clearly highlights that we are doing very well in terms of achieving sustainable development goals. A lot more has to be done. And climate finance is one important pointer. Now, next, agriculture has been given one complete chapter, and this is very normal in economic survey. We do see this, but this year it has been predicted that agriculture sector is looking at a buoyant growth. In fact, COVID-19 pandemic, it did not impact agriculture sector to a large extent. Why? Despite severe lockdowns and restrictions, agriculture sector was one which was kept open. The country tried very passionately to keep the supply lines open for the agriculture sector, because the food stuff is very important. The sector, it has largest employer workforce, and it has also registered decent growth rate last year also, and the prediction is 3.9% for 2021-22. The economic survey says growth in allied sector, livestock, dairying and fisheries has been a major driver for overall growth in the sector. And if you look at the numbers, you will see here, as I told you, the growth has been quite stagnant for last few years. This year also, it is suggested the growth rate would be 3.9%. Last year it was 3.6 and this year it is going to be 3.9. But there are some key pointers from the economic survey which have been observed. What? See, if you look at the agricultural production, this is the graph which shows what do we produce: rice, wheat and coarse cereal. And if you look at these numbers, you will see that rice and wheat, they amount to major chunk of production in India every year, right from 2015 to 2020-21. Yes, it is a major food, we understand, rice and wheat. But the skewness of agriculture production towards rice and wheat is mainly because of the MSP. And we have seen the agitation by farmers over all these issues, the 3 farm laws, the entire political development that we have continuously followed on StudyIQ. So because of MSP and because of our skewness towards wheat and rice, production is quite high. But if you look at pulses and oilseeds, their production has rather been stagnant. And every year we have to import pulses, every year we have to import the oilseeds also. In fact, the price of oil, so from last 2 years, it has been quite high. Why? Because oilseed cultivation or the land for oilseed cultivation, it has been stagnant. The demand is continuously increasing. We have to import oil from the other countries, right? And that is why the economic survey clearly observes that we need to encourage the farmers to shift cultivation from rice and wheat to pulses and oil seeds, so that we reduce our import dependence on pulses and oil seeds. A shift in cultivation towards pulses would enable the government to maintain a buffer stock of pulses, a decent buffer stock of rice, wheat and pulses as well, right? In fact, the government has been prioritizing production of pulses and oilseeds through various programs. We know about these programs, and they are trying to expand the area, increase the productivity by providing high variety seeds, MSP support and the other procurement also. So the economic survey also observes we need to shift from rice and wheat towards oilseeds and pulses. In fact, I told you pulses and oilseeds, they are imported. That means our domestic demand is so high for pulses and oilseeds, our cultivation is not enough. So we import it from some other countries. And our importing strategy also has been quite knee-jerk. If you remember, the price of pulses, it fluctuates a lot. I hope you remember 3 to 4 years back, the prices of pulses, they went to 200-250 rupees per kg. And then we started, we first of all stopped the exports from India to other countries. Then we started importing from other pulses producing countries. So the economic survey also talks about avoiding these knee-jerk reactions to essential commodities, because oil and pulse is essential commodity for everybody. We all need pulses to eat. We all need oil to eat. So continuous changes in duty and tariff over imports, it creates problems. The economic survey observes that it gives a wrong signal to domestic producers, as well as it creates an environment of uncertainty for the other exporters who send it to India. So economic survey suggests that a long-term consistent approach, and in this direction the government has already taken a step. It highlights that 5-year memorandum of understanding have been signed with Myanmar for annual import of 2.5 million tons urad. Not just with Myanmar, but we have also signed MOUs with Malawi and Mozambique for the import of tur and pulses. And these MOUs have been extended for 5 years. So what the economic survey says, these memorandum of understandings, they are going to bring predictability in this particular sector, both for domestic producers as well as the exporters who export to India, right? So these are the changes which have been highlighted in agricultural sector. Now, apart from this, there's a very important mention of ethanol blending program. Now, ethanol blending program is going to get more and more traction. So in the upcoming budget, we might expect some funding towards this, because government has a 20% target for ethanol blending in the petrol to be achieved by 2025. And if this is the case, then we are looking at a large scale funding or large scale allocation towards sugar industry also, because sugar industry is the major producer of ethanol. So our ethanol blending program might look at a higher allocation this year in the budget, right? Apart from this, in the MSME sector, something important was mentioned. I told you this was also a supply side reform that the government has brought. They have redefined the criteria for MSME. The earlier classification for MSME, for micro, it was less than 25 lakh in manufacturing, less than 10 lakh in services. But now it is less than 1 crore or 5 crore turnover for manufacturing and services, everybody. A common parameter has been brought. Now, a micro service industry is less than 1 crore investment, less than 5 crore turnover. A small MSME is less than 10 crore investment, less than 50 crore turnover. A medium industry would be less than 20 crore investment and less than 100 crore turnover. A common parameter for manufacturing and services. Now this has been brought. Now apart from this, the economic survey also mentions about the Champions portal. A very important thing, please note this Champions portal. A simple MCQ can come here. What is the Champions portal related to? Now, if you get confused, you might tick something from sports, right? So please remember, Champions Portal is an ICT-based technology system for making smaller units big by helping and hand-holding them. Please remember, Champions Portal is connected to MSME sector, where smaller MSMEs would be turned into bigger companies by helping them and by hand-holding them. So you can see all the features of the Champions Portal. Please remember this point. Right, next, electronic sector. The electronic sector has got a special mention. We all know that we have a national policy on EDSM, electronics and semiconductor manufacturing. We have a huge goal, $500 billion target, right? Now, it talks about, the economic survey talks about a report by Goldman Sachs of 2021, where there has been a supply chain disruption in the semiconductor industry, right? And it has spilled over to 169 industries, which we all know. Automobile industry is disrupted. All the other industries have been disrupted. Now, the economic survey observes that the manufacturing of semiconductors, it requires a very long time. The gestation period is about 6 to 9 months, and it has a long production cycle also, 18 to 20 weeks. And for any change in this particular sector, it is going to be very slow and a very costly affair. So our shift towards the electronic sector is going to be very slow. And recently, even America has started their own production in the electronic sector. So in India, the electronic sector growth would be rather slower. India has also experienced similar trends, not just in the electronic sector, but in many other sectors, where because of semiconductor shortage, because of chip shortage, all the other sectors have also been impacted. So a slow recovery in electronic sector is anticipated going henceforth. Apart from that, the survey also mentions about PARAK, a unified laboratory network. Please remember this. What is PARAK? A question can be, what is PARAK portal? Now, PARAK portal, this is an accreditation, certification and recognition of laboratories in the country, which would be mapped based on geographic information system. And the United Laboratory Network has been developed with the support of METI, Bhaskaracharya National Institute of Space Application and Geoinformatics, Gujarat's BISAC, and other concerned ministries. Over 6,000 laboratories have already been mapped. Now, why this has been done? To ensure that India's laboratories, their testing and all the other facilities, they are world class. Now, to get this particular thing, PARAK, a unified laboratory network, is being developed. The portal PARAK basically helps us to search any kind of a lab for a particular product, the test, the standards of the test, where the lab is located, in which city, what are the nearby labs. All these things can be found out on this portal called as PARAK, right? So please keep a note of this also, right? In the railway sector, something has been observed. In the upcoming times, we are looking at more and more infrastructure spending in railway sector. The survey observes in railways around 65,157 crore capital expenditure has been seen from April to November 2021, this year itself. And the capital expenditure outlay for the ongoing financial year is about 2.15 lakh, which is 5 times more than 2014 level. In fact, railways capital expenditure is going to further increase as railways expansion plans are coming. Railways has been considered as a very important engine for national growth. So in railway sector, we are going to see more and more allocation. So keep an eye on the budget tomorrow, where we might look at a higher allocation towards railways and railway modernization programs. Apart from this, the survey also talks about startups, and we might look at some new schemes for startup promotion in India in budget. Startups in India have seen a remarkable growth in the last 6 to 7 years. The economic survey highlights that new startups have increased to 14,000 in 2021-22. It was a mere 733 in 2016-17. So in the last 5 to 6 years, the growth has been phenomenal. In fact, India has been at rank number 3 in terms of startup ecosystem, just behind US and China. A record 44 Indian startups have achieved the status of unicorn, that means $1 billion worth company, in 2021 itself. Today in India, we have 83 unicorn companies, unicorn startups. In fact, the report also talks about startups in the space sector. The startups in space sector in 2012 was just 1. Slowly and steadily by 2021 there are 47 startups. In 2021 we have developed 47 in 1 year itself. So today the total is about 101 startups in the space sector itself. So we are looking at more and more growth or more and more promotion for the startups in the upcoming budget for sure, right? There is also mention of a logistics plan connecting pillars of India, PM Gati Shakti plan. Right? Please note about Gati Shakti plan. This Gati Shakti plan is an integrated plan for ensuring multimodal seamless connectivity for people. This Gati Shakti plan, it includes 16 ministries and infrastructure like Bharatmala, Sagarmala, Inland Waterways, Dry Land, Scheme Udan, etc. The Gati Shakti plan is also expected to include social infrastructure like hospital and universities going forward. The Gati Shakti plan is going to improve India's connectivity and ensure that there is more and more business development, making Indian products, making Indian business, making Indian economy itself more competitive, right? And for this, the informatics or data is being taken from ISRO imagery, which we'll see at the end of the discussion also. In fact, a separate chapter has been dedicated for this ISRO imagery and the other information, other cartographic information in the economic survey. Now, after logistics, there is a mention of education also, of course. Now, if you look at education, there is a trend in the education sector. The total number of schools, colleges and universities in India has been increasing. 2018-19, 19-20, the number of schools have been increasing. But because of COVID-19 pandemic, this number was affected. But nonetheless, there has been one observation towards the basic facilities being provided in schools. The economic survey observes that the schools with basic facilities is continuously improving, and if you look at the last thing, computer and internet, this is rising at a tremendous rate. So what can we expect under the education? Already many schemes have come up for digital education, for promotion of e-learning, etc. This trend is going to continue in the budget again, where there will be focus more and more on e-learning. We might anticipate this in the upcoming budget. Right? So various sectors have been covered, various industries have been covered. And the last chapter of this particular economic survey is satellite images and cartography. Right? A special chapter has been dedicated for data tracking development through satellite images and cartography. Now, let me take you to this chapter directly and show you what it includes, because it's a very interesting snippet. Right, this is the last chapter, tracking development through satellite images and cartography. Let me zoom in a little so that you can see here. Now, this dedicates a complete chapter. Now, this economic survey dedicates a complete chapter towards this satellite images, where a lot of information has been shown. Now, let me zoom out a little. India nighttime luminosity 2012, and this has been compared with the latest data of 2021. So look at the amount of electricity, look at the amount of power that has reached people. Apart from this, it also shows the network of highways in August 2011 and now in 2021. Just look at the comparison, the amount of roads just in 1 year, in 2021 itself, about 36,000 kilometers of road have been constructed as per the economic survey. Apart from that, the number of operationalized airports in 2006 was just this much. But now, if you look at the airports, many airports have come up under the Udan scheme, under the tier 2, tier 3 city airports. A lot of airports have come. The spread of commercial banking branches, it is immense. Just look at the maps, you'll understand. Again, this clearly shows the focus on data, focus on imagery, focus on cartography, and a comparison from 2005-2006 net zone area, and today the net zone area has also increased. These are the things that are provided in the last chapter of the economic survey. Right, so I hope this session was helpful for you. That's the end of our session, and again, as I told you, it's a gigantic report, and you have to do a cost benefit analysis. A lot of data will also be seen here. The most important things have been covered in this, but if you're an aspirant for UPSC Civil Services, I would urge you to go through the report again. Just give a customary look at least, right? So that you pick out some data for prelims and for mains, because a lot of questions do come from the economic survey. So that was it from my side. Tomorrow we'll meet again for the budget discussion. Thank you for watching this video. Jai Hind.